Hello and welcome to On the Record, a debate-style television talk show where Bahamians will find the balanced, true and open debate you've been looking for. The age-old adage of spare the rod, spoil the child has long been a proverbial staple in Bahamian society. The mantra has been passed along from generation to generation. But lately, as we listen to frequent reports of students leaving the school black and blue with bruises, we see viral videos as well on social media of little ones acting out in retaliation. It begs the question, have the lines of discipline and abuse become blurred? In September of 2000, a 12-year-old boy at SE03 school died from an apparent epileptic seizure shortly after being physically disciplined by a teacher. A few weeks ago, photos of a young man's bruises after being disciplined by the principal from St. Augustine's College went viral. And we can't soon forget how the nation was rocked by shopping clips of Little Muffin. Well, tonight on The Record, we discuss corporal punishment. Is it truly the rod of correction, or is it a weapon of mass destruction? It's all on The Record tonight. I'm your host, Jerome Sawyer. Our discussion begins on the other side of this break. Even a good thing, when done in excess, can become toxic. Discipline is a key component to molding children into well-adjusted adults. But when does a figure of authority's discipline veer into uncharted territories? How far is too far, and how much is too much? Tonight we sit down with guest Colin Johnson. He's the principal of R.M. Bailey Senior High School, as well as April Finlayson, one of the founders of the Leadership Academy, as well as a 2019 St. Anne's High School graduate, Jordan Desmangles. Gentlemen, lady, welcome to On the Record.
Thank you.
Welcome back. This is your second time. Good to have you on. The show obviously is timely for a number of reasons. As I said in the introduction, sort of the most recent has been the accusations of against the administrator at St. Augustine's College. But this issue of disciplining and how to discipline and how much is too much and how far to go, this is a long-standing issue. I referenced a case back in 2000 where a student actually died after being disciplined at SE03. Teacher involved was exonerated. But it's every time something like this happens, it raises the question, how do we discipline children? How much is too much? I mean, and times are changing. As I said, even before I got here, you know, I grew up in fear of my teacher and my mother and my father as to what would happen if I got out of line. Things seem to have changed. I've assembled you all here because I think this can really lend for a fantastic discussion. I do want to talk a little bit about background and some of the things you face. April, as being the only lady on the panel, I'm going to start with you. The type of school that you have is a little different. It's not sort of the traditional school where you have dozens of kids in a classroom. I want to talk about your setting and how that differs from the traditional classroom and some of the challenges you face just within that setting when it comes to discipline.
So our setting is a program that's focused mainly on individualization and personalization in education. And so that in itself is a challenge, because the first part is individualization, and you're talking about a group of students gathered together and a teacher having to navigate and figure out, how do I serve each child fairly? And so in an environment like ours, that's what we've placed at the center of our understanding of discipline, or anything that we have to do with our students, is that fair does not mean sane. And we push that over and over with our students, that they're able to understand that. In the way that our classrooms are arranged, we don't have any more than, let's say, about 12 to 15 students in the class. But with those 12 to 15 students, each one of them may be working on something completely different from their peers. And so that means that if Johnny stands up and is exhausted by the end of the day, that doesn't necessarily mean that Susie has the right to stand up, you know? And so there has to be a lot of very systemic things that we have in place about how the day runs. There's, you know that if you stand up, you tuck in your chair. You know that if you do a certain thing, then you will earn a certain discipline form, and for us, that's like a blue dot, you know? And so those things are told to students very early, and they have a system to look at to understand that this is our benchmark. And then from that benchmark, I then know that because this is an individualized environment, what will happen to me will not necessarily be the same as what will happen to another student.
Colin Johnson, you come from the traditional school. You've got twice, 3 times that in a classroom. That's one class, that's one stream. You've got hundreds, potentially thousands of kids you're dealing with every day. Obviously, it's different.
Quite naturally. You know, I'm from the old school, and I am one who seriously believe that we ought not to sacrifice the moral standards to bring about failure in this country. I know about discipline. Discipline brings about success. That good book of Proverbs teaches us some things. It gives mankind instructions to life. And we know what we were taught when we were growing up. Like I said, I'm from the old school. There's some scriptures in the book of Proverbs that not only should be applied when those children come to school, but they should be applied at home. See, this is a partnership thing. I tried to do research on abuse, and I honestly don't believe that abuse can happen at one time. It has to be something that transpires over a period of time, abuse. Yes, we initiate discipline within our school system. Of course, we have to make reference to our Safe School Protocol.
This is put in place by the Ministry of Education.
Yes, by the Ministry of Education and the Government of Bahamas, in terms of how corporal punishment should be initiated. And it clearly states in the manual how it should be. And so we just follow that. But discipline should be and should never be taken out of the school system. Never be.
You mentioned something. You said I'm from the old school. What does that mean when you say I'm from the old school?
Because
he's gonna look at you and say, "Nah, hold
yes,
on."
I came under the likes of C.W. Sawyer, Hugh Campbell, Enoch Beckford, and they placed some discipline measures in me that made me what I am today. And I strongly believe that we ought to carry that over. We should never sacrifice what's happening now in the school system, government school system, that is discipline, the use of corporal punishment, how it's initiated, for anything else. It brings about success. Whenever you have a system or a school that does not show discipline or where there's no discipline at all, then you're going to have a chaotic organization. You're going to have an unsuccessful organization, and nothing is going to happen there. And I proved that at my school.
Good. I want to draw some specifics in just a few moments. Jordan, I want to get you in now. You have just completed your high school education. You've just come from being on the other side of this now, from the receiving side. What's the general feeling of your peers towards discipline that they receive in school? Is it something, and I'm going to preface it by saying, like, I remember in my primary school, I was scared. The teacher had a ruler on the desk at that size, it sat there. My first grade teacher, Mrs. Britannia, she had a name for her ruler. I forgot what it was called, and then you got into high school, and you know, I know we used to call it caning. You used to go to the principal's office to get caning, and you lived in, that was something that always lingered in the back of your mind. Is it different now?
I would say, to an extent, it is different now. Well, for my school, St. Anne's School, we operate where, let's just say, not so much discipline in terms of physical. It can reach to that, but so much in terms of suspension, expulsion, detention, stuff like that. Community service hours, which you have to do. It has changed. Personally, me, my peers, we are, I would say, fearful of physical discipline because we know that we have a bigger goal to accomplish at school. We aren't for mischief, we aren't for trouble, we're for success, making a better farmers, striving in school. But
everybody isn't at that same place.
That is true.
You all, I wouldn't say the exception, but a lot of kids aren't focused on that. You're just in school.
Yeah, that's true. But whenever it escalates, it has to be a very serious situation for it actually to be physical punishment. And to what extent? It isn't going to be anything out of dramatic or out of emotion. You have to act on strategy.
I know you.
Right. I'm having a challenge right now in understanding where we blur the line between assuming that in the absence of corporal punishment, then there is not discipline. Right? And so I think very quickly for a number of reasons about my environment. In my environment, we do not institute corporal punishment, but my students are very disciplined. And I know that there are some advantages that I have because it's a small environment and I'm able to develop relationship. And I think at the core of establishing discipline is this need for having a relationship. If you think back to being children, one of the things that I feel like the rod of correction that was stronger than any sword or any stick is if you loved someone and they said, I'm disappointed in you. Okay, you see, that hits, that really hits, and that's something that really lasts. And so when I think about discipline, I see so many other things that can be incorporated beyond corporal punishment. To be quite honest, there have been a lot of studies that have shown that past the age of about 6, and if you haven't established certain things, a certain repertoire, a certain type of habits or systems in a child by the age of 6, implementing things later, is this whole idea of teaching an old dog new tricks, becomes very difficult. And I would be kind enough to extend that to, let's say, about 7, you know, but when we start talking about how many people pass it, I can remember, I'm going to be honest, I can remember when I got to, I used to get beaten. I had scheduled beatings almost. I might as well tell you all. Everybody who knew me knew that. However, I did get to the stage of my life where I could make up my mind, you know what? I get told that cut it, and it's going to be what it's going to be. However, just the thought of my mom saying, April, I'm so disappointed in you, that would pierce through me like none other. The beaten, I could forget about, but I am not going to forget those words. And so for me, I just think that relationship is something that we can't pull away from. And that serves to a much deeper conversation that needs to happen nationally, is that we, when it comes to communication, when it comes to building relationships, even between school and home, these are where the breakdowns are happening. And so when we have a chaotic situation or we have some traumatic event take place, like the event that recently took place, now we start to think about quick fixes, or we go to something that is the familiar, you know. But the changes in the way that young people are isn't something that just magically appeared overnight. Even when you used to get that beaten, I'm sure you reached a point where you felt like, man, and you was like, I still know what I want to do anyway. And so it's about establishing it's about moral development and character and conduct, and children having a guideline for what that should look like.
You know, it takes me back to that voice, and I agree with everything that you would have said. Train up the child in the way they should go.
Okay, so then, very interesting, you said 6, 7. So, in essence, by the time a child gets to school, hypothetically, these things should be in place in the home, which comes back to where I really want to take this discussion. The child is presented to school. That child now becomes the teacher's responsibility, the administrator's responsibility, but it would seem that a lot of children are coming to school without even the beginnings or the inclining of any kind of discipline at home. And so now these children are being presented to school and they have not even been given the fundamentals of discipline. Is that something that you are finding that's happening?
That's right. Again, train up the child. And
So these children come to school this way.
Lacks training at home. And if those kids are trained in the way they should go, then they become older, they will never depart from it.
When you say train, give me some examples. I want some specific things that you find that kids come to school and don't know
Discipline.
what.
Discipline. When they get to school, they're supposed to know, hey, they're going to an institution of learning where learning should take place, or where learning takes place. Nothing else should happen on that campus or in that school. And so in order for that to happen, they have to be disciplined. Because when they're disciplined, they're focused. And when they're focused, they become successful. In order for you to be successful, you have to be focused. In order for you to be focused, you have to be disciplined. If there's no discipline, how can the students learn? How can you bring about success?
What are some of the fundamental things that you find that kids just do not have when they walk into the classroom?
Sometimes I would find that children may not have order, but contrary to popular belief, children love order. And so even when you have this child who may not have been exposed to a certain level of order, when you have a system in place that they can recognize and understand and practices that they can have, then you can transform this whole idea that this child has not been exposed to discipline before. Especially when you think about like an environment like mine where I have a broad spectrum of students that come in, broad spectrum in terms of financial background, broad spectrum in terms of academic needs. And so I have had that challenge of having some students where it's so hard to have to offer any type of order or discipline because this is a child who's rewarded for anything. These are children who might have an iPhone, and like how do you set in, especially without the corporal punishment, how do you put in place something to discipline a child who gets everything that they want whenever they want it? And that is where culture and climate of a school becomes so important. That's all a teacher has. That's all administration have. And you know, there are a lot of buzzwords that you would hear in the education community nowadays as far as like social emotional learning, grit, the discussions from like the works of Carol Dweck, who is the individual that came up with this concept of grit. But when you take that a step further and you start thinking about moral development, you have organizations like Making Caring Common out of Harvard that's really looked at, you know, because in the US you have this problem with school shootings. We're talking about these issues, but it's like what is causing things to get to this point where there's that chaos within a child that they would feel the need to shoot someone. And that's where they've realized the organization is called Making Caring Common because all of the research has proven that having children who care is what makes the difference in establishing this order and establishing this discipline.
We have adults that don't care.
Right.
And so again, that's the root of the problem. We're going to take one more comment before we go to the break. And Jordan, this is going to be for you. Do you was it your experience? I know the answer when I was in school, but was it your experience that you outright knew those kids who came into the classroom who were not disciplined at home?
Yes, because I immediately knew from lack of manners, respect, and I would say character. As simple as saying good morning, that's lacking. And it's disappointing to see people my age who don't have that kind of stepping stone that is needed in order to be successful. But you have children who are, I would say, who grew up in a home where it's just nothing, and they don't get enough, I would say, discipline. They don't get enough coaching in order to be on the straight and narrow as they should. So children, especially younger children, they've become, I'd say, very rude. I mean, it's not like me. I'm a good child, but I'm a good child. But
we're going to explore it a little further. We're at the point of our first break, but I do want us to hold on to something, and that is our discussion has come very quickly as to where the fundamental problem lies, which continues to be in the home in many, many instances. We're going to take a quick break. We'll come back with more on the record right after this. Hello and welcome to On the Record, and the balanced, true and open debate you've been looking for.
This portion of On the Record is brought to you by Generali Insurance Company Limited, your employee benefit specialist.
Serious demon. Tell them go, please. Tell them leave her alone. Let her go. Go fix my lantern back here.
That clip you just saw there was someone called Muffin, a little girl whose viral temper tantrum resulted in her becoming somewhat of a household name here. Was it a cry for help, or were we witnessing a child out of control? Our guest tonight, Colin Johnson, principal of R.M. Bailey, April Phillinson, one of the founders of the Leadership Academy, and a 2019 graduate of St. Anne's High School, Jordan Desmangles. That clip preceded by a whole sort of outburst from this child, went viral. People shared it, they commented about it, they talked about it on social media for weeks. When a child like that shows up at school, who has that level of disciplining issues, or that level of, who's at that level at home, how do you deal with that in the school environment?
Obviously, there's a problem there. And quite naturally, the guidance department had to be involved with that. There's no need for corporal punishment when you are confronted with a situation like that. The child needs help. And so we must sit down and find out exactly what's happening, what's in the child's head that brought about a situation like that.
When you, though, are a teacher, you are in the classroom, you have 30 students, and a child acts out. What should happen, or what does a teacher do in an instance like that when a child just completely disrupts, even threatens?
Again, referral is made to the office. And again, we have to sit down and talk to that child, find out what's happening. Something has to be happening. See, I say to my staff every day, when you see a person walking on the campus, either with the head up or down, you know what that child or the person is going through. And so you have to find out. You sit down, you have a conversation, and you will be surprised to know what brought about that kind of behavior. And then you can deal with situations like that. You don't just jump to corporal punishment. No.
Do you find sometimes that what is happening in the home is playing out in the classroom?
Most of the time, if there's a problem that you have, there's something like, you go back to bullies. Oftentimes, bullies are being bullied outside of the school environment, and they come to school and become a bully. And so more often than not, it's an issue at home, or it's an issue around the home environment. And when you ask the question, what does a teacher do, and Mr. Johnson responded that you would have to make a referral, and that conversation is to be had. What a good teacher would do is, even if that is not, their responsibility, later showing that child care and saying, do you feel better? They may have carried on in your class, but just those little actions are the things that open the door to trust. And you start to see a different attitude developing from children. But a lot of the times what happens is many other adults in their lives have failed them. And so they already have this picture of adults as being an authoritative, distant, disconnected individual. And so you have to go against the grain and you have to go out of the way. When you see an instance like that, you have to go out of your way to make sure that you've established some level of trust if there is going to be peace for not just that individual, but for the rest of the classroom and for the rest of the school.
Jordan, and from a student's perspective now, one kid or a group of kids have disrupted the class. They go out. But then it was my experience that you didn't really hear anything else. Like, how does that now affect the rest of do you look at that and say, well, hey, he got off. All that happened to him is he got taken out of the classroom, but we're left here now to deal with it. You know, how does that now affect the entire atmosphere in that classroom?
Takes the wind out of it. People feel that if this person can do it, so can I. Or a different approach where if he can do it, then that's not right, I'm gonna go at him. So you could clash. It could be a problem. Let's just say if you have a really close teacher and this person disrespects the teacher, you may feel a way about it and you speak out, then you get in trouble because of it. Or let's just say this person that tries to attack you, and then it's another, I would say, a fight in class. And then all two of you are in trouble just because of this one person's poor decision. So you have to look in yourself, but you also sometimes need someone to talk to you about certain stuff. Me in school, I've always been, I would say, I try to be a role model for my friends. I try to show people and tell people the right way, because that's the only way you get by in life.
Colin Johnson, I'm a teacher. I have any number of classes that I'm teaching, any number of students, but I've got these students now who continuously disrupt, who cause issues, and that's taking away from my ability to teach. I'm frustrated. In many instances, classes may be overcrowded. I have so many other things going on. And this one child is just gnawing at me, and now human instinct is about to kick in. I've had enough. Do you find instances like that happening?
Yes. I would then pull that child's on file and look at the history.
Well, what about the teacher too at that point? Because now the teacher who was the other party in this is now, you know, the level has risen now. I'm angry. You know, I've gotten all, you know, you taught me all these things in teaching school, teaching college, and I know what is supposed to happen, but human instinct is going to kick in at some point.
And most of the time, all the teacher wants at that point is to have that child taken out of the class, so that so the teaching learning process can continue. So we take that child out. Like I said, I asked for the child's file. I look at the history to see if the child was one who presented problems, who has presented problems before, get guidance in, then send for the parents, and we sit down, we have a conversation.
Do the parents come?
They better come, because if they don't come, then the child stays home until they're able to come.
And then what now? Let's get the other part. What now is the, what's the attitude of the parents? What's the disposition of the parent? Now I have to leave work, I gotta come. The child, don't tell me it's a problem with this teacher. All these things are in my head. I present myself.
Well, I say to the parent, you don't have to be here. Your child caused this. That's the one who you need to hop on. You don't have to be here. You could be in the wake. I knew back then if my parent had to be called off. But they never did.
That was the fate wasted.
That was problems. So the child is the one who caused you to be here. Not me, not the teacher. So you deal with that child.
But you have parents, I'm sure, that are coming that are hostile.
They don't come to my office.
Right, people will go as far as they know that they can go. And I mean, one of the constant things that's coming up in this conversation is that we started this conversation talking about children, but we know that the root of the problem is the adults. There's no way to get around that. And I really love the fact that when you ask Jordan the question about when you see what happens in the classroom, what does that do to the morale of the class? And Jordan says it really takes the win out of things. That reminds me of situations that I found myself in. And so at my school, we stick to biblical principles. And one of the things that is said in scripture is that I will deal with you one-on-one. And then after that, if the problem persists, I take you to the elders. And then after that, if the problem persists, then I take you to the community. And so at my school, when you would have had those types of instances and it becomes an issue where it could take the win out of something, or we're going to talk about it as a school. This is going to become a school thing. And I have had parents that have come into my school and felt that that was so inhumane because I've embarrassed their child. They are beyond thinking about the fact that the child did something wrong to start with, and let's talk about healing the community. Let's talk about someone else not thinking that they can now do this. Let's talk about why did that happen in the first place. Let's go through all of these neurochannels about why you would have thought your behavior was appropriate in this environment so that we don't allow this to happen again. And then you have the adult saying, you know, the child may have accepted it because that's the culture of the school, but you would have the adult who's now saying,
keeping it going.
"Oh, right. Oh, I don't think that's right. I think that that's embarrassing."
And how does that play? I know kids can do this quite well. You have an issue in the classroom with the teacher, but what you present at home is a completely different picture.
Yes.
And so now parent is coming in with a completely different idea. And kids do it quite well.
Yes.
Quietly. And the slogan is, "Oh, I know my child," but that don't always be the case.
Why not?
Because, I mean, you could know your child at home, but at school they could be a completely different person. You don't see that. But when they come home, it's like everything is okay. Now, let's just say you got in trouble with a teacher at school. You go home and tell your parents what happened first before they find out. You could tell them a completely different story. It doesn't have to be true. But you have to make that teacher or paint that teacher out to be as bad as possible just so that you can get the spotlight off of you. But that doesn't necessarily have to be true.
And as a parent, do you find are parents honest enough when they are called to the school? And you're right. Oh, I know my child. But I also know that children can have dual personalities and act out differently. But are parents really honest enough when they come to the school and find themselves now having to deal with a disciplinary problem in the classroom? Are we honest enough about what our kids are capable of?
You know, sometimes I wonder if the child has in their head that when I tell my mom or my dad they're going to school, because they give them a different story. And when the parents come to school, it's a different story, the true story, that different story is. And they're disappointed to know that their child didn't give them the correct story. You know, and yes, I found that out in a number of cases in my office. And the good thing is, we get it settled.
But are parents always willing to accept the truth?
Well, here's the thing. We know this is going to happen. We don't know the type of parents or the different personalities coming into it, but we know that this can happen. And so in an environment like ours, we have a parent orientation, and during our parent orientation, one of the things that you learn is that this concept of slanted news. And so we have a name for it. We define what that is as a community. We lay out what that looks like as a community. And so when you come in and I have the language of slanted news, then that kind of levels the playing field when you have conversations with parents. And that goes back to my initial statement about communication. Having language, having systems in place, and when these systems are in place, now you have something to work from. But if you don't set a benchmark, it could go all helter-skelter.
Let me ask you this too, and Ms. Johnson, this is to you. Is it, and I've had teachers say this to me, that sometimes you don't see a parent, you don't even know a parent until there's a problem.
That is true. The good thing for me, though, you know, I've been in the system some 39 years, and the students in my school now, they're like my grands. So I've taught their parents pass through me. And so I don't have that much of a problem.
Those who mommy, who's your daddy?
Yes, they know me.
But then I'm sure there are still cases where, you know, teachers sometimes do not know parents are not going to show up until there's a problem.
Yes. What I do, especially like around report card time, those kids whose report cards are not picked up by parents, I say to them, you have to spend a day or two with your parent. You'll have to discuss the report card, or you're not going to come back to school and tell the report card as being picked up. You see, my thing is parents must play their role. They must play their role.
That's the beautiful thing about the National High School Diploma, is that there is the specification about how many parent-teacher conferences you would have had to gone to consistently through the high school years. And so that was definitely a step in the right direction. You know, a lot of people haven't taken the time. You'll have people who will complain about the National High School Diploma, and they really haven't taken the time to parse apart what is happening and what, you know, the ministry was trying to, and NACOB was trying to put in place. And that's something that's really strong. The fact is now you can't get away with your child graduating from high school and we've never seen you before. You know, so that's a start.
Jordan, I really want to know from your perspective, how much does it matter to have that parental involvement when you know that your teacher, your parent or your parents are in communication with your teachers?
It's big. I would say it pushes students to new heights and new limits because they know if they don't live up to the certain part that they set or part that they set, that their parents will be involved. And like she said,
and you know that teacher will talk to mommy.
I know that for a fact. And like she said, when there's nothing worse than when your parents say, hey, I'm disappointed in you.
Interesting.
That cuts deep.
Well, folks, if you are enjoying our discussion tonight, stay tuned. Our show continues right after this break.
Matt, where in the world is Matt Lauer? Where in the world is Ellison Greenslade? And so these about the low value of cottage in Atlanta. So we can talk about it.
On the record tonight, the government's purchase of the Grand Lukine is a hot subject in the news. We're going to... Our topic tonight, discipline. We're discussing it from the point of view of those who are chastising and those who would have been chastised. Tonight, my guests are Colin Johnson. He's the principal of R.M. Bailey, as well as April Finlayson, one of the founders of the Leadership Academy, and a 2019 graduate of my alma mater, St. Anne's High School, Jordan Desmangles. Are we giving our kids too much today? Are we providing them with so much and access and giving them so many opportunities that we are sacrificing some fundamental things in the process?
Yes, sometimes, I mean, it depends on how you're looking at it. One of the things that happens is parents will sacrifice spending time with their children to be able to afford to buy them something to keep up with the Joneses. And so we invest in a lot of material things. I think that we are now thinking too materially as it relates to our children, as opposed to giving them a lot of the nurturing that is necessary. And so the ballots are like twisted, you know?
You talked about being from the old school when there was a time when we didn't have distractions. I mean, I came from an era where television turned on at 5 p.m. And then by 8, 9 o'clock, you were in bed. But things have changed. Children can be occupied with so many other things. Is that affecting our level of interaction with them? Are we spending too much time away from our kids, or are we not spending enough time with them?
The intentions of the parents is good, you know,
Yeah.
but the results, poor. The results are not there. Like we said, we want to satisfy our kids because we know that we're not spending quality time with them. And so in order for them, in our heads, for them not to act out, we want to satisfy them with some material things. And it's affecting them. I grew up in the area where I didn't have no TV. No TV. The only thing I knew was get your books and get into those timetables. That was in the 60s. I think parents are doing an injustice to the children today. They want to become friends. And I said to the parents who come into my office, that's your child, not your friend. Be the parent, not a friend. When you do that, you will bring about a child that is going to be productive, that will be a very good citizen of this country.
A lot of the time too with the materialism, what it is that it's a parent's lived trauma. And so you would have the parent remembering, oh, everybody else used to have Atari and I didn't have Atari. So I want to make sure that my child doesn't have this trauma. And so that's their issue playing out. That's not necessarily them responding to the individual that's in front of them, you know? And so if it's a lot of times if parents were taking the time to get to know their children with the way that the world is, and the children being children are exposed to these types of conversations. They watching your show on YouTube, you understand? So they know that there is an issue, and if parents would take the time to slow it down and say, what do you need? What is it that you really want? A lot of the times their children will let them know, well, in the place of that thing, I want time with you.
Do you also find that you were exposed to a lot of adult things as a child, growing up in school? things, you have access to this. You are in front of some things that I had to be 18, 19 before I could engage in. But you all have access to that, and had access to that immediately.
Yes, but it was a matter of my parents setting guardrails and boundaries, and you never cross them. See, boundaries are there to make sure that you go here and then you stop. Now, that isn't happening today. Children have the liberty to do what they want. I think it's too much freedom, and I think parents give them too much time alone and time to themselves. Parents should set a certain time where this is time for us, this is time for school, this is time for church, to have positive things in their life and not so much negative.
One thing that you said, and I've got to ask you, is it very easy to deceive your parents? Because you mentioned that, hey, you say, I know my child, but you know your child in school.
Yes.
Is it easy to live that lie in front of your parents?
Yes. Believe it or not, yes. But at the end of the day, you know your parents, you could say you're smarter than your parents, but the older the wiser. So even when you're trying to con them, they
well, some.
Some.
But back to my question, is it easy to live that lie? And if so, how do you get, how do your parents and how do people get on with you put yourself in no problem?
Yeah, my mommy can be watching this. My mommy watching this.
But how were your friends able to do it?
I mean, just a matter of, I would say, knowing their parents and knowing what they tolerate, knowing their limits, and knowing that, hey, I could do this, but I can't do that, or I can't do this, but I can do that. So I would say looking for the right way to do the wrong things. That's what it is.
I remember my teenage years, there were some atrocities that I committed outside of the view of my mother, and I think if she ever knew. But I also knew how far to go.
Exactly.
And if my behavior became known, or if I ever got into any problems as a result of that, or any of those behaviors, I knew what was coming. Now, but I lived in fear of my mother.
Exactly.
I lived in fear. But do you find that is still the case? Do kids nowadays still have that level of fear? Or is it that, I'll deal with the consequences?
No, they don't, you know.
They don't?
I don't think so. They don't. Parents don't be there enough. They don't spend enough time with the children for their kids to have that fear in them.
One of the things that my mom always says is that because adults have so many other things going on in their world, we don't recognize that children, all they have is time to study adults. And so when it comes to being able to manipulate them, that's all they have time to think about to do. And so I think that was her advantage with me. So, you know, you talk about, I had that fear and all that types of stuff, but I used to think up, I wasn't like Jordan. Jordan is a sweetheart, but I was mischievous. And so I used to think up some things to kind of like get an emotion out of her or a rise out of something, but she was always 2 steps ahead of me. And I think a part of that is recognizing, one, that children have that time to be paying attention to you, to see, to learn you, to be able to manipulate you.
And that's parents and teachers, eh?
Parents and teachers.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is being honest about your own genetics. You see, I know that Jordan is a good boy. I know that I was a mischievous child. So when it's time for me to have children, I have to be real about the fact that they carry in my DNA. And I think that's where a lot of the breakdown comes. You will have parents who are pretending as though they didn't have a past, or pretending as though, like your atrocities, forgetting that you had that period. And so that's how children have this entryway into being able to pull the wool over your eyes, because you're not being real.
I say it all the time now. Whatever trick you think you could pull,
exactly,
I can tell you how to do it better. I say that all the time. But understanding, and then again, you know, that point you made about studying adults. Are we sometimes are we naive in some instances as to what children are capable of, and even are doing?
Yes.
I think we are.
Yes.
Really?
Yeah, in a lot of cases. For the mere fact that they would act one way at home, and then when they get out, they're a different person. And then when you get the news about them in school, I never thought my child would have done that, because at home they're not this way.
How do you get to that though? How do you get to know that child and what that child is capable of? Or do you just sort of you have that disposition, or you have in your mind that, you know what, I think I know my child, but I know that he or she is capable or could be capable of anything?
Two things. One, you spend the time, as we talked about before, to pay attention to that child. And then if that's not working, you need to pray for the spirit of discernment. And I mean that, okay? So, because at the end of the day, that is really one of the greatest weaknesses when it comes to parents having to, especially realistically speaking, we know that, like Mr. Johnson said, parents mean well. And so a lot of the times you don't have that extra time because you might be working the 2 jobs, etc. And so you really need to get to the place where if you don't have the time to study, you praying real hard for that spirit of discernment to be able to recognize the patterns or the attitudes of your child.
Does the age of the parent play a role?
Definitely.
Yes.
Definitely.
Yes.
How so?
So one of the things that I've talked to my students about a lot.
Mr. Johnson's shaking his head. I
Yes.
think I have to say, but go ahead.
One of the things I've talked to them about a lot is if you take a classroom, and Mr. Johnson and I talked about this, if you take a classroom of children and you ask them what years their parents were born, you could tell the children of baby boomers. Baby boomers are the ones, their children will walk in, these are the parents that are 55 and above, they'll walk in, their children are the ones that say good morning, etc. You could
Pushing
tell,
the chair.
Pushing in the chair. You could tell the children of the Generation X's. Those are the ones who are going to rock that slanted news. And the reason why is some of those Generation X's had parents that were baby boomers. They carried their level of resentment because at that time the gap between them and their parent wasn't as distant in terms of age. And so they already have a certain level of resentment to authority. And so it's so easy for their children to slant news to them because of their own trauma with authority. And then you have now some of the millennials are becoming parents as well. But believe it or not, I noticed that millennials, as much as people like to complain about them, are not as bad as Generation X's. I apologize. So
That's good to know.
There's definitely a marked difference. And that's when I talk to them about, okay, so who do you want to, and they're like, I played a game where we were all in assembly, and I said, who do you think in the school is always well-mannered? And so they will encourage people to stand up. And we did that straight through a whole bunch of different personality traits. And then afterwards I said, now, if your parents are this age, stand up. And when they saw that there was a real pattern, they were so intrigued to the point I said, now, how are you going to define your generation? What is your parenting going to look like? And when we start having those conversations and they're able to kind of like separate, all right, this is what my parents are doing and this is how it might be weak, this is what I would like to do different.
Fantastic. You were shaking your head, Mr. Johnson, when I asked the question about does the age of a parent really matter? What's your experience?
How can you be a parent if you were never a parent? What I see needed though is parenting courses, especially when you have these parents who were not parents.
They're children themselves in many ways.
That's what I mean. And so it presents a problem for us. Yeah, it presents a problem for us. And so I would like to say, in order for us to bring about a better society, for us to bring about better schools, better communities, there has to be an involvement, a great involvement of parents. Parent has to play a part. If they don't, it's going to be a heavy load for teachers, and no way. Teachers cannot do it alone.
If I don't respect my
Parents
parents,
must play.
I don't respect my
And I
parents,
agree
I
with Jordan.
definitely ain't gonna respect
Because parents
my
play the
teachers.
role. Parents must play a role in their children's lives. Must play.
Yeah, and you made the point, we're going to go into the break with that. If you don't respect your parents, you don't respect the home that you've come out of, there is no way that you're going to respect the classroom, the community, anything. I can't imagine you coming out of a home where you don't have just basic residing respect for a parent. I'm sure you see that all the time. You're watching On the Record. Our final segment is right up after this break. Hello and welcome to On the Record, a debate-style television talk show where Bahamians will find the balanced, true, and open debate they've been looking for.
And the icon goes to On the Record.
On the Record was born out of a desire to do something different. What we do every day helps our country, it helps our society, it helps to shape the views and opinions.
Listen, what is more dangerous than
Gentlemen, we've got to move very quickly. Let's wrap up.
integrity?
It's all on the record. I'm your host, Jerome Sawyer. Our discussion begins on the other side of this break. This is our final segment. My guest, Colin Johnson, the principal of R.M. Bailey High School, April Finlayson, one of the founders of the Leadership Academy, and a 2019 graduate of St. Anne's, Jordan Des Mangles. I want to bring this discussion back to where we begun. Sometimes a teacher or teachers, administrators, will find themselves under threat, particularly as students get physically larger, as situations escalate, as things may heat up in the classroom. And we have seen instances where teachers have been attacked. Mr. Johnson, I'm starting with you. As an educator, when a teacher finds him or herself in that situation where a student now, or a group of students is about to become physical, how do you respond? Do you respond? What happens?
I was trying to remember the number for the Grove police station, because I would then call the police, I get the police involved. And then the parent had to meet that child at the Grove police station, and then the police takes over there.
And that's what should happen?
Yes.
So you remove yourself from the situation?
Oh yes, that's the police matter now.
It's violence. It's violence.
Yeah.
And then, how do you then recover from that now? That child has gone into the hands of the police, but still needs to be educated, still needs to complete their education.
Well, I always say children come to school, you know. Man and woman, they go and they find a job. If you cannot conduct yourself like a child should in school, then you need to be removed out of this setting and find a setting where you can make it, a setting where you can learn some things. But obviously, where you are, in the setting you should be.
I'm so idealistic. I really am. My moral idealism is all the way out there. One of the things that I think is important is that we have gotten into a very rote, mechanized way of looking at education. And when you see that you have children with these types of challenges, then we need environments that can serve them. Education is a right, it's also a privilege, and it comes with responsibility. When we're talking about the youth, I think it's because of the way that I was brought up and the things that I've heard coming from a Southern tradition, and my mother always saying, like, you do not give up on children. When students come to my school, if you see me let it go, it's 2 to 1. Usually that's the parent I let go. It's not the child, because there's always hope for children. And so we need to start thinking about having the types of environments where we can serve the needs of our children. A lot of the times it's not fair to, especially in the public school system, it's not fair to administration, it's not fair to teachers, that the classrooms are large. A lot of the private schools are getting to that point as well. And once you get to the point where we have these very huge organisms to have to manage, and you start to talk about needing to develop a child and needing to develop relationship and building communication, a lot of the time that's difficult because of the size of the environment. And that is something that we can think about it 10 years in advance, and 15 to 10 years down the road, we will have something in place to be able to respond to that.
Children learn differently, they grow differently, they need different things. Jordan, are you concerned, looking down the road, that this level of discipline is going to overshadow the ability of your peers and the people who come behind you? Is it going to, do you feel like it's going to overshadow our ability to become successful?
I see children every day with so much potential, but it isn't until they realize it in themselves and they'll be fully brightened. Children need someone to believe in them, and if they don't have that, then I don't feel that they will feel that they will be able to do what people say that they can't do. So I feel a sense of hopefulness that one day the youth will find the courage to flourish. But until then, it would be, I would say, a regression.
Very powerful. Finally, I'm going to ask you this. You have talked about it. Both of you have talked about it, but you're at an off-camera assignment. How important is the continuation of prayer and biblical principles within the educational system? Our neighbors to the north have removed prayer out of schools. You can only find it now in the church schools and the private institutions. How important is it, from where you sit and you've both spoken to it, how important is it to continue to have prayer and these biblical principles within the school setting?
Well, we cannot lean towards what our neighbors in the north are doing.
We see what's happening up there.
Yes, yeah. Yes. We cannot move away from that. The book of Proverbs teaches us some things, and those things must be institutionalized within our schools if we're going to have successful schools. There's no other way. Whenever we find ourselves deviating from that, we're going to have problems. But I just wanted to piggyback off something that Jordan was saying. And a prime example at R.M. Bailey is a young man by the name of Keno in Bristol, who grew up through Ida Street.
He just graduated, eh?
Yes.
He was in the program I do
1.9, and he went up to 3.67, got a full scholarship at St. Benedict's. Doing well, because he realized, not at a late time, that, hey, this is what I should be doing, and this is the way I ought to go as a young man. And I applaud him for that. And I believe there are many Keno and Bristols out there. Yes. Yeah.
Congratulations to him, April. I know that. I have to say this, I was recently fortunate enough to sit in at your graduation ceremony, and I was, part of the reason I asked you to come on the show, I was so impressed. But one of the things that struck me was this great emphasis on biblical principles, and I see you shaking your head. Why is that so important to continue within the school systems?
That is so important because it gives children a foundation for life. And the whole idea is that you are not preparing a child just to be an academic. You are preparing a child to live. You're preparing a child to operate in society. And biblical scripture gives them the tools to be able to navigate this world. As I tell my students all the time, one of the things that they might complain about is that we have a monthly scripture verse that you have to learn. And it's not one verse. You have to learn like 16. And you have to say that
be a challenge
from your memory. And I don't care if you rap it. I don't care if you give me a skit. But the point is, at the end of the month, you have to say that scripture. And when they're going through it, I tell them all of these things that we have access to the best as far as education is concerned. However, those are the things that you're going to forget. What you are going to remember is the scripture. And I think about just the other day, I have a student that a lot of people are familiar with, and that's Jasper Thomas, who's DJ Overdose. And when I went online the other day, on his Instagram page, he had, before you formed in the womb, you knew me. Before I was born, you sanctified me. And it's Jeremiah, and it's our school scripture. And all I was thinking is, this young man graduated a year or two ago, and here he is placing in social media, when this is a young man
in a secular
career. That's right, he putting God first, and he's making it clear, and that's something that they did in school on a regular basis. And so that's the type of thing that brings me joy. And I know that, as I tell them, I say, y'all gonna be mad at me, but all of y'all gonna come back and y'all are gonna thank me that the way your prayers can be answered. You have people who complain and they don't think God is real because they're not praying with God's language. If you don't know scripture, it's going to take a little longer for them prayers to get answered because you ain't using God's word. And so I tell them, to have answered prayer, you need these scriptures, and it will make a difference.
Jordan, you've come, like myself, come through the Anglican school system, where weekly mass is a part of what you do. You live by some principles. Even now, did you see that having a major effect on you when you were within school?
Yes, it taught me that every week it became something to look forward to, not so much of a burden that it once was when I first came. But Father Kavega's sermons be real inspiring, because not only he speaks about the world and how it's changing and how we have to live for God, because I mean, if we are for God, who can be against us? So he taught us what it was to be disciplined, he taught us what it was to be respectful, manners, but also knew when to put his foot down. But crack a few jokes then and now. But the weekly masses helped me get through my days.
I used to pray in mass, especially when I had a test. Maybe I needed to know more scripture. That didn't work out. I just want to say thank you again for coming on the show, to all three of you for bringing such a great perspective to the issue. It's still very difficult in many ways because children have always, even now and will continue to present challenges, you know, as they now begin to transition from childhood into adolescence and then into adulthood. And, you know, from our own experiences, and you can figure this out very quickly too, that sometimes it's one of the more difficult stages of life.
Yes.
Because there's so much that's happening. And first of all, I'd also like to commend both of you for the great work that you are doing. April, I certainly enjoyed the program. My godson came through it. I'm so very proud that he was able. And Mr. Johnson, thank you. I do a mentorship program with my fraternity on your campus, and the young men who have come through that program just within the first year certainly are a shining example of what you're doing in the school. I know you're doing great things, so continue to keep it up. How long have you been in education now?
39 years.
That's almost as long as I've been alive. Well, thank you again for coming on to our audience. We hope that you have enjoyed our show tonight. Special thanks to my great guests, Colin Johnson, April Finnison, and Jordan Desmangles, my producer and technical staff. Certainly it's been a pleasure. To all of you, I'm your host once again, Jerome Sawyer. We'll see you next time.